Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar in our Beef Brunch educational series. My name is Ashley Edwards. I'm an Assistant Extension Agent and Coordinator of Animal Science Programs for the LSU Ag Center. With us today is LSU Ag Center Field Crops Extension Entomologist, Dr. Sebe Brown. Dr. Brown will be discussing management practices for controlling armyworms and Bermuda grass stem maggots. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be muting your microphones. We ask that you keep those muted to assist with faster streaming. If you're joining us via the Teams app or link, you can direct any questions to the live Q&A box. We are going to hold those questions until the end of Dr. Brown's presentation. If you are calling in, you can text your questions to me. My number is 512-818-5476. Again, if you're calling in and cannot see the screen, you can text your questions to me at 512-818-5476. With that, Dr. Brown, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ashley. All right, so let me go. Okay, so today I'll be discussing armyworms and hay fields and pastures, and I get a lot of questions from guys throughout the year on especially the past couple years with armyworms, seeing really just kind of once they set up shop in pastures, we have a really hard time getting them out. Last year wasn't quite so bad. The year before, I know we had some serious armyworm issues where guys really fought them hard and made repeated applications to control them. So I know we've had some tough armyworm years in previously, and so hopefully this year will be better, and I can answer some questions for y'all if you have any going forward. All right, so let's get into discussing the differences between the fall armyworm and the true armyworm. So earlier this year, I got calls from guys, this is in cornfields and wheat fields and some in pastures, about guys seeing an armyworm that was starting to infest their fields and starting to defoliate. And what we saw was the true armyworm that's going to be on the right-hand side of your screen. So the biggest difference between the true armyworm and the fall armyworm is the true armyworm doesn't have the inverted Y that you can see with this red arrow on it. And so the true armyworm is going to be controlled the same way that falls are. I mean, a pyrethroid insecticide is going to work very well. Catching them in a sweep net is going to be the same. Basically, the biggest difference between the two is one has an inverted Y and one doesn't. They even really get this almost the exact same size. And so one of the issues that we see with trues is that trues show up early. And so that's why we typically see them in wheat and in seedling corn, is that they're going to be more of an early spring pest, whereas fall armyworm typically appear more in the summer and sometimes in the fall. So hence the name fall. But also with fall armyworms is that we have two different strains. Where the true armyworm, we have one strain. Fall armyworms, we have two. And so one is called the grass strain and the other is called the corn strain. What guys in pastures fight is the grass strain. Easily controlled by a pyrethroid, going to be the same fall armyworm that we see in rice, that we see in pastures, and that we see in potentially grass crops like, let's say, wheat planted in the fall. And so those are going to be very easily controlled with a pyrethroid. The corn strain is going to be what we see in corn, cotton, grain sorghum, soybeans. And the only way that you're going to kill them with a pyrethroid is if you drop the jug on them. So that's just a little bit of the differences in some of these worms. And so I know that's probably a little bit more information than you guys want, but just in case if any of you guys have neighbors that grow row crops, that may be some of the differences between the two. But what I've seen this year is more, at least thus far, the calls I've gotten this year have been more true armyworms versus falls. And that's really the easiest way to control them. It's going to be using insecticides, and the easiest way to identify them is going to be to pick them up and take a look at that head capsule and see if there's an inverted Y. All right, so just general and typical armyworms in Louisiana, most of you guys already know this, especially if you have pastures, you know they can build large populations quickly. And so That's why, you know, getting out in your fields is going to be very important, because they are going to defoliate fields very rapidly. And so when you're catching the amount of armyworms that you can see that I've got in the sweep net right here, you know, that's really you're going to see some economical damage when it comes to a lot of your pastures. And these are some good sized worms. I mean, this is actually a picture that I took out of a hayfield a year or two ago, and this was a severe infestation that had a lot of different sizes of armyworms in it. And so you don't want to let your fields get this bad, because these armyworms can eat a lot. The economic control methods do exist, and thankfully they are cost effective, and they're very affordable as compared to some of the other things that we have to deal with. And sometimes your populations may control themselves. And so if you get lucky, sometimes these armyworms wind up taking care of themselves before they wind up causing economic damage. All right, so armyworm eggs. So I'm going to take you through the life cycle, the biology of these, and then go into control methods, scouting. And so, you know, we're going to kind of go through the whole biological process of these insects. And that's going to start with laying eggs. So the female moth's going to mate. She's going to fly into your fields, and she's going to lay eggs. They're going to typically deposit eggs in masses of 50 to almost 200. They're going to be a fuzzy little patch that you'll see. You may or may not see. You probably won't, because what's going to happen is once these eggs are deposited, the worms may take 3 to 4 days to mature and hatch out of their eggs. And then what's going to happen is once they hatch, they actually eat the egg mass, the furry egg mass, and the eggs, what we entomologists call chorion. They actually eat the chorion to give themselves protein to move on to the host. So a lot of times, you know, if you're out in the field, you may never see these eggs, because you can see on this next picture, these actually are starting to eat the egg mass. So these fall armyworms are they've hatched. These are neonates, and they're starting to feed on their egg mass. And so they do that to give them kind of a leg up, as in a biological advantage moving forward. So they're bigger worms and have a better chance of surviving. And also they can have their mouth parts are developed a little better, so they can physically eat the grass cellulose that is in your pastures. So these newly hatched armyworms are going to be the larvae are going to be cream to light green in color. And then your later instars are going to become darker, and lines are going to appear on the body. As an entomologist, I normally tell guys don't utilize color as a way to identify insects. Insects can change in color from temperature, from age, if they've just molted. There's a lot of different factors that can change the colors of insects. The best way to really ID an armyworm is to look at that head capsule that I showed a couple slides ago, and if it's got an inverted Y, or if it's got a mottled brown head capsule, being the true armyworm, that's going to be the best way to identify these insects. With pastures, it's going to be a little bit easier, because there's not many insects that actually defoliate grass. And so you're going to have fall armyworms are going to be the primary species that y'all are going to see in your pastures when it comes to worm pests. So ID is really not that important, but when it comes to anything else, if you guys grow anything else other than pastures, you know, a correct insect identification is very important, because it really goes into play of what kind of insecticide choice we may need to use, what cultural practice. And so getting the insect ID'd correctly is fundamental. So looking at the life cycle, so your eggs are going to take 3 to 4 days to hatch. So your instars, which is pretty much what an instar is a growth stage. So these insects are going to move through growth stages very quickly. And so they're going to typically take 2 to 4 days to complete. Now, this is going to take into consideration day length and temperature. Development time really varies with temperature. So if you get a fall armyworm flight that moves into, let's say it comes in the late summer, we're very hot. And so these guys are going to move through their development very quickly. And so you know, it's going to be your chances of rolling through populations in the summer are going to be a lot quicker. They're going to turn over much quicker than they will, let's say, in the fall when it gets very cool, or in the early spring. They're going to wind up staying worms longer, and then you have the potential of overlapping generations. And so it can, you know, under cool temperatures, it can slow their larval progression to almost 30 days. And then what does that creates waves where you're going to have mixed larval sizes at the same time. And so you're still going to have adult moths moving in, laying eggs, and you're going to have different size worms eating on the same field. And so what we normally see is temperature-wise, temperature doesn't affect the moths as much as it does the larvae. Larvae are a lot more temperature affected than the adults. So it may be 50 degrees outside, but the moths are still going to fly. The female's still going to come in and lay eggs. Now the worms may not be moving very much because it's so cold, but the moths are going to be out flying around. And so that's why you'll see a first instar worm with a sixth. And that's why we'll start to see these overlapping generations. And then something that's kind of unique to a lot of these, the worms that are similar to fall armyworms, is the last instar eats as much as all previous instars. So as the worms, when you get big worms, so when you start to get these worms that are, you know, approaching almost 1.5 inches long, they're going to eat as much foliage as their previous life cycle, all of their instars before them did. So in 2 to 3 days, they're going to eat as much as they did during the entire time they were alive. And so that's why controlling big worms is going to be harder, because they eat more. And just as a general rule, insects or worms specifically that are larger are harder to kill. It takes more insecticide to kill a large worm than it does a small. So trying to stay on top of these guys, not letting them turn into what we call snakes. Don't let them turn into big worms, because the bigger they are, the more they're going to eat and the harder they're going to be to control. So that's why it's really important to stay on top of these and to really kind of pay attention to what's going on, and you know, just try to stay on top of scouting as best you can, because I don't want you guys to lose your pastures. And you know, y'all work hard trying to, you know, get hay cuttings and you know, provide for your cattle. And you know, if you sell hay as a business, so we don't want fall armyworms to take that away from you. All right, so like I said, cool season temperature has its effect on worms. So it's going to slow larval development, and this is kind of just summing up what I just said. Slower development increases likelihood of overlapping generations. And that's the same picture that I showed earlier, but you can see the different size worms in there. You've got some very large worms, and there's also some pretty small worms in there as well. So that complicates management strategies, and then when you have that many worms in a pasture, they can really do some damage. Okay, so pasture injury. So your injury often appears from the edges first. Worms, like most any insect, are going to take the path of least resistance. And so they're going to, where they encounter grass first, they're going to set up shop and start feeding. Once they exhaust those resources, they're going to start moving. And so when worms get overcrowded and start to exhaust whatever food resources they have, they're going to disperse. And that's a lot of times also why they're called armyworms. We don't really see it much here in the United States, but in a lot of other countries, they actually move as an army. And so they're going to move en masse. They'll cross roads where you see hundreds of thousands of worms defoliate. It could be pasture, it could be wheat, whatever. And they'll actually, once they eat it all, they move en masse across the road. And then they'll move to, let's say, your neighbor's field or across the turn row. And if you Google some pictures, you can see it. It's pretty wild to see the amount of worms that sometimes these things will just get up and move. Newly established stands and weak pastures are at most risk for serious injury. So if you've got a newly established stand, Bermuda grass, and you know, it's going to be a little bit on the weaker side, doesn't have roots sunk yet, hasn't really had a lot of time to really get its growth established, and you have fall armyworms come in, you need to take care of them quickly, because they will destroy a newly established stand much easier than they will an established one. And if pastures are weak, and so if it's drought stressed, or if it's got, like I said, bad stand, whatever, it's overgrazed, whatever it may be, you know, the weaker the pasture, the more at risk you are to losing it completely to fall armyworms, because they're opportunistic feeders. If they're going to start with a dense stand first, and they're going to defoliate that if you have a dense spot in your field, and they're going to move to your weaker spots. And so once they move to the weaker spots in mass, they're going to wind up walking right through it. So keeping your pastures healthy and keeping them, you know, don't overgraze them, keep them healthy, you know, use the appropriate, you guys know when the best time to harvest hay is. Don't let the growth get too rank. I mean, just good best management strategies for pastures are going to help reduce the likelihood of potentially losing, losing a lot of your stand and losing a lot of foliage to armyworms. So your early signs of infestation. So small larvae are going to what we call window pane leaf tissue. So the larvae are actually too small to eat the entire plant cell contents. So what they're going to do is they're actually going to scour it. And so that's going to leave a window pane-like surface on the plant. And so you're going to leave just a really thin sheath of cellulose there on the plant. And so if you get enough of that, you're going to have a frosted look. And so it's almost going to look like your grass has a frosted appearance in the middle of summer or really in the fall when we shouldn't have frost. So that's going to be a symptomology of a lot of small or very small armyworms, a fresh egg lay really moving in and setting up shop, starting to cause a lot of damage. And so kind of going back to the edge scenario, you can see growing brown patches from the edge. So if you see a brown patch that's walking its way across the field, I definitely want to go take a look because you might have an armyworm infestation moving forward. All right, in scouting, don't solely rely on birds. I meet guys all the time that tell me that they wait for the birds and then they're going to go out and take a look. Do not wait for birds because birds are going to not be out there eating at the neonates and the first and the second armyworm, or second instar armyworms. They're going to be out there eating the big snakes, so the fifth and the sixth instar armyworms, the really big ones. And by the time that happens, you've allowed those worms to eat so much that they wind up defoliating your pasture. So don't solely rely on birds. If you want an indication that there may be worms there, if you see birds congregating on one side of the field, that's going to be your management strategy. But ideally, what I recommend and what the Ag Center recommends is to scout early and scout often. And for sure, initiate scouting if you see birds congregating and it looks like they're feeding. And so, but really don't wait on birds. Scout early, get you a sweep net, or if you don't want a sweep net, just walk through your pasture, which I know everybody does. And if you start seeing worms on your pants, you might want to start taking a little bit closer look. And so as an entomologist, I've tried thinking about trying to do like a pants threshold where how many worms you have stuck on your pants when you walk out of a pasture. I have to get somebody a little bit smarter than me to help me do that. But one of these days, I think I want to try to initiate that and see if I can figure something out with how many you catch on the ends of your pants. But something else is frass. So frass is bug poop. So that's the fancy word that entomologists give insect poop. And so if you start to see frass, and I don't have a picture of it here, I should have put one up. Frass basically looks like little round basketballs that you see on the ground. And so if you start to see frass that's on the ground, on the soil surface, that means that worms are there or they've already moved through, which you're going to see because of the damage. But if you start to see something that looks small, like a little basketball that you start seeing on the tops of the leaves or on the ground, that's going to be insect frass, which means there are insects there feeding, and that means they're excreting waste. Something I did mention about scouting is fall armyworms don't like to be exposed during the heat of the day. So when you scout, try to scout in the early morning or the late evening. And so they don't like to be exposed to afternoon sun at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so they can desiccate quickly, and they just they're not adapted well to extreme heat, some that we see here in Louisiana, especially on the top of a grass pasture. And so typically what they're going to do is during the heat of the day or as it starts to get hot, they're actually going to work their way down the soil surface. And so if you have a thick thatch layer on your soil, what you can do, or underneath your grass, is you can take that thatch layer and split it apart. And if you've got armyworms, they're going to be hanging out on the soil surface because it's much cooler down there, and they're going to be hiding underneath that thatch layer. So, if you're out scouting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you may not find them on the grass, but I bet you're going to find them on the ground. And so that goes with both true armyworms and fall armyworms. Their behavior is very close is almost identical. But just kind of the takeaway on that is when you scout, try to scout in the mornings or scout in the evenings when the temperatures cool off just a little bit, and you can find them or have a better chance of finding them, especially if you're using a sweep net. So the threshold we have is 1 worm per sweep. Our OSU Ag Center threshold is 1 worm per sweep, or 2 worms per square foot. And so really what I've told guys to do if they don't have a sweep net is get you some PVC pipe with 4 elbows and just make you a square. That's all you got to do. Or yeah, make you a square and just glue it together. And when you walk out into a field, just toss it in front of you. And that's the easy. That's randomly sampling. Or if you want to make one in 2 foot square, you can do that. Just make something that is roughly a square foot, something that that you can make, whether it's 2 foot, 3 foot, doesn't matter, 1 foot, and just throw it out in front of you. Or the best way to do it, if you truly want to do a random scouting, is you walk into a field and you throw it behind you where you can't see where it's going. And then what you do is you go find that square and you count all the armyworms inside that square. It's very simple. It's easy. If y'all aren't interested in buying sweep nets, I know most everybody's got some spare PVC laying around. Just make you a square and those things last forever. I have some that I've been using for years and it works very well. And it's a really good teaching tool, especially if you're trying to teach someone how to scout. You can just take it out there, throw it, and it makes it really easy to make the decision if you need to spray or not. Typically, I recommend scouting 10 random areas. I mean, that's up to you, the size of the field. I mean, if you walk into a field and you hit 2 areas and you're finding, let's say you're finding 5 worms per square foot, I'd stop scouting and I'd go get on my sprayer. Because, I mean, more than likely, you're going to wind up having a large area of a lot of different insects or a lot of different armyworms in it, and you need to get them under control now. I mean, if you want to scout a couple more areas just to make sure, you can. But for the most part, where I see it is, if you're finding a large number of worms after a few scouting stops, you need to go ahead and get ready to make an application so they don't wind up defoliating your field. Try to take samples. If you really want to try to kind of coordinate where you're going, take it from dense vegetation first, because that's a lot of times where armyworms start. So if you've got an area of the field that's got a little bit denser grass in it than others, start sampling there. And if you're finding worms there, or if you're on the fence, then start moving out to other areas and see if they've moved across the field. And then scout at a minimum of 2-week intervals. Ideally, I tell guys to do it once a week, but if you can do it every 2 weeks, that works as well. But ideally, I would like to see guys do it maybe once a week, just so you know what's going on out in your field and you have an idea so armyworms don't jump on you quickly. Because, even at our summertime temperatures, it's still going to take those worms 3 to 4 days to hatch. And so if you're out there scouting every week, you can catch those worms when they're small and you can stay on top of them very quickly and very easily. Okay, so looking at natural control methods. So the good thing about pastures is they harbor a lot of beneficial insects. And so because we don't use a lot of insecticides on them, and it's actually a very nice little mini little ecosystem that allows the plethora of a lot of beneficial insects to thrive. And we see a lot of predators, parasitoids, and pathogens. And so this beetle at the bottom of the screen is just an example of a ground beetle. It's a ground beetle that I see in a lot of pastures. I see it in a lot of fields where we have fall armyworms or true armyworms, and they really do a lot of feeding on these worms. However, these guys can only eat so much. And so that's why a lot of times armyworms reproduce quicker than ground beetles, than parasitoids, and then pathogens can kill them. And so that's why it's important, that we use an integrated approach, that you try to preserve all your beneficial insects that you can and only use an insecticide when it's needed. But you have your predator ground beetles, wasps, birds, your parasitoids. The Cotesia genus is actually they're a very helpful genus of parasitic wasps that we have in Louisiana. If you see fall armyworms that have a kind of a cottony looking, it's kind of a cottony looking extension coming off their back, that's probably been parasitized by a Cotesia wasp. And so what that is that's actually pupae. That's little wasp larvae that are developing inside the worm, and they're killing the worm as they develop. And once they hatch, they actually kill the worm. And so it's kind of a little side note fact that I learned being an entomologist is, if anybody likes science fiction, the movie Alien was actually, the guy that directed it saw what a parasitoid wasp did to a worm and came up with the idea for the movie Alien by watching a parasitoid. So it's kind of, if you need a human version of that, you can think of the movie Alien. That's what these insects are doing to these worms. So the insect world's kind of cutthroat, so just be glad we don't have to deal with that. But pathogens, Nuclear polyhedrosis virus. This picture I know is in wheat. I didn't have a really good one in pastures, but it does the same thing. I took this year. This was a wheat field I got called to in South Louisiana. That's a perfect example of NPV, or nuclear polyhedrosis virus, infecting worms. What it does is it hijacks their central nervous system, they don't have a central nervous system, their peripheral nervous system, hijacks their brain, for lack of a better word, and it causes them to crawl up to the top of the plant canopy, and they essentially liquefy. And so by doing that, it releases viruses into the environment, and that virus is actually spread by birds, wind, water, and we're talking billions, if not trillions, of virus particles that are released from one worm. So when these things do catch and they take off, it can take out an infestation of armyworms quickly, but it's just having them catch in the right environmental conditions have to be perfect for them to take off. And so it's hard to rely on them, and by the time that typically happens, you've got so many armyworms out there, you're taking some serious damage. Okay, so chemical control. Large worms are harder to kill than small. And so, that's I mentioned that earlier. Be aware of grazing and harvest restrictions. You guys have pastures. I know you guys know this. There are generic options available, so don't feel like you have to use the name brand insecticide. There are generics. And then cut, grazed, or quick mowing pastures are not going to have as much supposed to be residual after applications. So, you got to think pyrethroids are not translaminar. Pyrethroids sit on the plant surface. So you get a rain, sometimes a heavy dew, after you spray, that pyrethroid is gone. Same thing with cutting, grazed, or quick mowing. So if you guys make an application and then you come in and put cows back on it 2 days later, they're going to eat the residual off the plant. And so you're not, you just kind of keep in mind, especially with our cheaper products, the pyrethroids, that, if you cut it for hay or if you graze it, you're going to wind up taking whatever residual control is there, you're going to take it with you. Also, with a pyrethroid, you're only going to get about 1 to 3 days. So at most. And that's really, pyrethroids are broken down by sunlight. That's by their very design. That's how they're designed as a chemical. They don't last very long. And really, if you're getting 3 days, if you get 3 to 5 days out of it, you're really doing something. But most of your pyrethroids are going to last roughly 1 to 3 days. They're going to be fast acting. So your examples, Mustang Max, Karate, Bathroid, those are all good examples of pyrethroids that are used, and they work very quickly. So, almost to the point where after you spray, you have time to go park your sprayer and walk back to the field. You're going to have armyworms that are starting to die on the ground. That's how quick they work. Things like insect growth regulators like Dimilin are going to take longer. Dimilin is going to work best on small worms because it's a growth regulator. So what Dimilin does, it's a chitin synthesis inhibitor. So what chitin is what basically is what insects are made out of. Our fingernails and our hair are also made out of chitin. And so they have chitin in it. And so what this product does is inhibits the synthesis of chitin in insects. It's very safe for people, it's very safe for cattle. Grazing restrictions are almost none with these. And so, but it's going to take you longer. It's going to take longer to see control, upwards of 3+ days, because the worms have to eat it. And the more IGR they eat, the better it's going to work. And so, and if you think, it's got to work, if this disrupts molting and the synthesis of chitin, it's not going to work on a final instar worm. You get like a 5th, 6th instar fall armyworm that's about to pupate, they can eat as much IGR as they want, and it's not going to kill them because they've only got 1 molt left and it's to an adult, and that uses a different, it uses a different pathway, different system that is going to not be as effective as if you were to spray it on a 2nd instar. So they've got 3 to 4 more instars to make it through before they die. And so that's why if you catch worms small, you can use an IGR, and you're going to get residual control out of these. These are going to give you better residual than something like the pyrethroids. Something also that I've recommended to guys in the past, if you've got a serious infestation of worms and you need to get them out quickly, you can mix Dimilin and something like Karate. If you've got big worms that are doing damage, but you've also got a mixture of small worms, you can tank mix the two. It's going to be a little bit more expensive, but you're going to get the quick kill out of the Karate for the big ones, and you're going to catch the little ones with the Dimilin. And so that's going to give you kind of a 1-2 punch for these worms. So if it's something where it's kind of a Hail Mary situation, mix them and you'll get good results. and you're going to get typically 10 to 14 days of residual out of your IGRs. This is what's in our insect management guide. So you can see we have a plethora of different options. I do want to kind of point out the chloranphenilaprole or the Previthon. Previthon is a newer class of chemistry. It's a new product that we have used in field crops since probably 2009, and it's very expensive. I know with the big armyworm issues that guys had last 2 years ago, some of the chemical dealers were recommending Previthon and Besiege and telling these guys that it was going to give them 28 to 30 days of residual control. Well, that's not quite true. Your Previthon is translaminar. It does have a fantastic residual, but the problem is if you spray it and then you graze it or you cut it for hay, you're taking the residual with you. And so you're not going to have any residual on new growth from these products. And so whatever you spray is going to be taken away when you cut it, graze it, or mow it. And so, you know, you'd be better off, not to say these aren't bad products, but you'd be better off using something that's a whole lot more cost effective, like a pyrethroid or something like a Dimilin. You're looking at, you know, Previthon, let's say if you wanted to use a 14-ounce rate, you're looking at $14 to the acre, plus $5 application cost. You're roughly at $20 an acre to kill armyworms in a pasture when you can do it with a pyrethroid for less than $1. So it's not, the control you get is not 14, 15 times greater than what you're going to get with a pyrethroid. Dimilin is going to work very well. And so will it, even tank mix with a pyrethroid is going to work better. So the take home on that is, if you decide to use Previthon, it's going to work. I mean, I've had trials and I've looked at it in a pasture where it works. It's fantastic, but it may not be worth the cost for what you get. So just keep that in mind. All right, so moving on to Bermuda grass stem maggot. I know this has been a newer pest. I know we've had it in Louisiana for the past few years. It was first found in Georgia in 2010, and consequently, that's where a lot of the research is coming out of on this pest. It's going to be about the size of a hornworm, but it's also going to have an orange abdomen. So that's going to be, if you're out scouting for armyworms with a sweep net and you catch some orange worms that are about the size of a hornworm, they especially have an orange abdomen, that's going to be Bermuda grass stem maggot adults, and you need to definitely take those into consideration when you're making when you're starting to make pasture management recommendations for insecticides. This is going to be the larva, so you can see this was a picture out of Georgia where they dissected it, and you can actually see this is the larva that caused the injury. The adults don't cause injury, it's the larva. What the adults do is they lay eggs in the stem of Bermuda grass, and once the eggs hatch, the larvae bore into the stem and they start feeding, causing disruption of plant nutrients up and down, and causes death of new growth in Bermuda grass. So coming out of Georgia, like I said, this is where I got the majority of my information. I talked to some of my colleagues over there. Their fine stem grasses are going to be more susceptible. So fine stems such as Alicia, I'm not very well versed on fine stem grass varieties, but you guys are much more acquainted with that than I am. But I know one that I was given was Alicia. Highly managed, well-fertilized fields are going to be highly attractive to Bermuda grass stem maggot. Yield losses of upwards of 50% were experienced in Georgia in 2010, and they've seen higher numbers than that a couple of years ago. They were upwards of 70% yield loss, and it also decreased the feed quality of the hay by 7%. So it's adding insult to injury, because outside of causing yield loss, it's causing a decrease in your feed quality as well, and that was significant. 7% was a significant decrease, and so, you know, controlling these guys is going to be very important. And looking at some of the injury, this is some injury that we see from Bermuda grass stem maggot. So it's going to be the newer growth. You know, you're going to be able to see this and hopefully catch it before it gets bad enough that you're going to start seeing yield loss. And so you're going to, heavy infestations will affect high percentages of shoots and are going to slow the growth. So controlling them. If you can, plant coarse stem varieties. Tifton 85, like I said, I'm going to leave that up to y'all. But if you can, plant the coarser stem varieties for Bermuda grass stem maggot. If you start to see Bermuda grass stem maggot damage, harvest the field and remove the bales. Because what's going to happen is is if you let them get established there and they come in, typically they're going to start moving in early spring, in the summer, and they're going to get worse as the season goes on. If you allow them to set up shop in your fields and get bad, they're going to be worse each successive cutting unless you take appropriate actions to start killing the adults. If you don't kill the adults, they're going to wind up, it's going to wind up severely hurting your pasture and as the season goes on and you get more and more hay cuttings. If Bermuda grass stem maggots are in the area, and let's say you're out sweeping, or if Jason or Ashley or me or somebody lets you know that they're finding Bermuda grass stem maggots, once you cut your field, spray it 5 to 7 days after harvest with a low rate of a pyrethroid. And so, you can go, if you get a karate, or you've got a generic 2-pound karate, you can use the lowest label rate that it has on the jug. It does not take much to kill these. And so, try to save yourself some cost, especially because these guys aren't going to probably coincide with fall armyworms. Unfortunately, they're not going to hit at the same time, so you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Realistically, you're going to have to make separate applications for Bermuda grass stem maggot and probably come back and make one for fall armyworm. So using the lowest rate, the lowest labeled rate that we can use for a pyrethroid is going to work the best. And then cut as soon as your maturity and weather allow. If you start seeing injury, get in there, cut the field, get the bales off, because you don't want to perpetuate that life cycle. So the take-home message with these guys is they're specific to Bermuda grass. If you've got previous cutting head injury, your successive cuttings are probably going to have more. So, we need to be serious when we start controlling these insects, because they set up shop in Georgia. 2 years later, they had moved into Mississippi. And I think a year after that, 2013 was the first year I got my call on Bermuda grass stem maggots. So they're here, they're established, and we need to keep them under control. Your grazed pastures aren't damaged as much as your hay fields are, because what the cows are doing, or the horses or whatever, is they're actually pulling off, they're eating the affected tissue and effectively killing the larva. And so by grazing, the cows they don't care. They're going to pull it off and eat it, and they're going to wind up killing the larva. You want to control the flies before they lay eggs. So what you're trying to do is kill the adults. You're killing an adult fly before it comes in and lays an egg. Because once that egg's been laid, there's nothing you can do. Like I said before, pyrethroids are not translaminar, and so they're not going to move past the leaf surface. So once that egg has been deposited, it's over. I mean, that larva is going to hatch, and there's really nothing we can do chemically to be able to stop them from starting to complete their maturity or complete their life cycle and kill your Bermuda grass shoot. And so, just keep in mind, populations are probably going to be low about this time in spring, and they're going to increase throughout the year. And so, this is one insect. If anything, my colleagues have really talked to me that we need to take it very seriously, because it does have the potential to really cause a lot of yield loss in our pastures. And we see a lot of quality loss as well in the hay that you guys are potentially trying to sell or feed through the winter. And so, really staying on top of them is going to be important, and a pyrethroid is going to be your best option. We don't really know if Dimolin is going to have any activity. I know Dimolin as a feed through has activity in flies and manure. And so, but it's a different process. It's a different fly. And so having the worm lay its eggs in manure is different than having a fly lay an egg on a piece of grass stem. So, we're still, I know my colleagues in the Mid-South as well as the Southeast are looking at that, but pyrethroids appear to be the best option because we're trying to kill the adults before they can lay eggs. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up. This is my email address if you guys ever have any questions. I know Ashley and Jason both have my cell phone number and can get me in touch or get y'all in touch with me if I need to come take a look, or if you have any questions or concerns. Like I said, I'm happy to help you guys in any way that I can. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Ashley.
All right, thank you. Anybody, if y'all have questions, I haven't seen any yet, but we do have the live Q&A box, so we'll give just a couple minutes or a minute or so for anybody to send in those questions. I'm in the process of sharing my screen. So again, get those questions in. I will come back and look at those in just a moment. I do want to say that we have part 2 of this What's Bugging You series next week. So a week from today at the same time, 10:30 a.m. We'll have Mr. Jason Holmes. We'll talk about external parasite control in our cattle. And we would like for you to please give us your feedback. So I'm going to share this screen in just a moment again after I check the chat box. But if you open your camera on your phone, you should be able to essentially view the QR code here on the right with your camera. When I do this with my iPhone, it kind of puts like little yellow corners around it. And then up at the top, I get a little banner and it takes me to the survey in Safari. So it takes maybe 3 minutes to complete the survey. We would really appreciate it if you would give us your feedback on this so that way we can help improve our webinars, in the future. So again, I'm going to show that one more time in just a minute, but for just a second, I'm going to stop sharing. Let me double check.
Steve, we do have a question. Is there a threshold level for Bermuda grass stem maggot?
Yeah, that's a good question. Based on the research that I've seen, there has been a little bit come out of Texas, but I don't know if there has been any done for the Mid-South or the Southeast. And so I know the guys in Georgia are working on that right now. And I was thinking I saw somewhere maybe 10% infested. If you see 10% infested Bermuda grass sprigs, 10 to 20%. I'm thinking that number's sticking in my head for some reason, but it's realistically, from when I talked to those guys in Georgia, it was that if you see them in the field, you need to get them under control. And there's really almost I'd say, I'm not going to say a zero tolerance for them, but the thing is that they start out very low and then they increase very rapidly with each successive cutting. So they almost want to be very aggressive with them. And so you get them under control when you cut. Is really, if you see the damage, cut your grass or cut your pasture, get it out, and then go ahead and make an application to try to kill any adults coming back in. So that was the advice I was given.
Thank you. Jason, do you see any other questions?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you, ma'am, or sir. Wow, sorry. So thank you, Jason, for helping with those questions, and thank you, Dr. Brown, for presenting today. If you are watching this on YouTube, then I will also link that survey in the video description at the bottom. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. You can follow us at lsuagcenter.livestock. That is our YouTube channel, so you can search for us and follow us there. We will get this posted hopefully within the next few days. And again, please join us next week at 10:30 a.m. for Jason's External Parasite What's Bugging You webinar.